Hello everyone, Omar Ramos here. Thank you so much for participating in Latinos Progresando's MEX Talk series. We'll get you to our scheduled program, but I want to take this opportunity to talk about the organization that's bringing you this unique event that celebrates the history, contributions, and rich diversity of the Mexican culture in the United States. Latinos Progresando is a critical organization right here in Chicago, and so much of their work is ensuring Chicago families have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. From supporting parent leadership and small business development, hosting community events that promote mental and physical wellness, and opening the doors for community members to have access to transportation and green space, LP is rooted in building on the community strengths. LP's reach extends beyond Chicago's Southwest Side as they provide immigration legal services to thousands of families every year from 24 states in the USA and more than 45 countries around the world. But what might be one of the most exciting developments in the organization's history is on the horizon. This fall, LP begins construction on the Latinos Progresando Community Center in a building that was once a branch of the Chicago Public Library but has sat vacant for more than 10 years. They're restoring the building and returning it to its community service purpose. This project represents the future of Latinos Progresando and a major key to an equitable social and economic recovery. Building for the future is in Latinos Progresando's DNA, and it all started with just one guy trying to help people. It is my pleasure to introduce to you LP's founder and CEO, Luis Gutierrez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. When Latinos Progresando created MEX Talks 9 years ago, we set out to create a platform that would celebrate Mexican culture and highlight everything that the Mexican community brings to our city and our country. This year's event is about history and identity. Who are we? How did we get to where we are today? Where do we go from here? Before introducing today's lineup, I want to thank our title sponsor, Constellation Brands, and all the 2021 MEX Talk sponsors. Today's panelists will share their thoughts on the complexity, challenge, and power of our Mexican identity. I'm proud to introduce our moderator, Ángela Munguía, Executive Director at AMPT. But first, a special performance from poet Jonathan Mendoza. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Good early afternoon. I hope everyone's having a lovely day, a lovely Mexican Independence Day, and also Gamar Tov, Good Yantif to everyone celebrating the Jewish New Year. I'm fasting, so apologies if you hear my voice a little groggy without food and water today, but yeah, I am Jewish and Mexican, and I'm going to be sharing a poem about some of my cultural identity, and it's probably the most appropriate day of all for the Mexican Independence Day to fall on the Jewish New Year this year for me to be sharing this piece with you all. So thank you so much to MEX Talks and Latinos Progresando for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share this piece. I do want to give a content warning for this poem with references to violence against Indigenous peoples, and references to violence against people migrating. So here's a poem entitled Confessions on Gratitude. Confessions on Gratitude. My father tells me of Chihuahua, his birthplace, of women selling roses on street corners to remain alive, of children washing cars or selling mangoes with no shoes. He tells me of how he came to the US when he was 10, of how lucky he was to obtain a green card from his father's new wife, how his father obtained one from his boss. He tells me of the rotting car he drove from Arizona to Boston, of how lucky he was for it not to break down, how it was here where he would meet my mother, find a job, have children, how everything I am because of good luck. And I am to be grateful for my existence, sure, but sometimes I wonder if Chihuahua is the greatest exporter of good luck. Bad luck never gets anywhere. Bad luck always drowns in the Rio Grande or shot halfway up the fence by an immigration officer. But good luck gets the affirmative action scholarship. Good luck applied for citizenship at the right time. I do not believe anyone died because they were not strong. I believe I survived because I was lucky. I'm lucky because the indigenous woman forced to bear me, staring down the eye of a Spaniard's gun, did not end herself before starting me. I'm lucky because my Jewish family fled Russia before the raids began, because my Jewish family fled Poland before the raids began, because my Jewish family fled Spain before the raids began, because my Mexican family's green cards arrived after the raids began. And I do not get to disassociate myself from those who are undocumented just because I have the fortune of being documented. I'm not joyful for good luck. Good luck implies the death of everyone who does not have it. I cannot celebrate good luck in a graveyard. I blow out the birthday candles, and each year I survive is a year someone did not. I walk to school unbombed. I go to bed undeported. I hit the bar undroned. I'm everything the ground did not bury. I want a victory out of this, but I don't know what candles to offer the ghost beside me. I want a cake, a party, balloons, a gift basket. I want it all, entering the earth when they did. I'm to be grateful for my existence, sure, but gratitude is a Cold War's reparation away from justice. Gratitude does not lift up the dead, does not spill the life back into a mother. I want to be alive and well and joyous, but if I knew the world's like a cousin, I'd know death like a twin. There's a boy somewhere with my name, and he does not get to write this poem. I write this poem because I am not him, but here, alive, so lucky. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Jonathan, for opening up our panel with such a beautiful piece. You bring up a lot of powerful imagery in it. Can you share what inspired you and what you hope people take away from your piece?
Yeah. Well, what inspired me, I actually wrote this poem in the middle of writing a job application. I remember it was like 3 or 4 years ago, I was trying to write a job app, and I think I was trying to dig into more authenticity of why I believe the things I believe. And you know, for those who don't know, outside of poetry, I work as a community organizer. And so just thinking about like what actually culturally in terms of my lineage drives my passion for organizing. And this is what came out. What I hope people get from it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's, you know, hopefully there are different lines and aspects of it that everybody's going to glean more importance from, more or less. I think in terms of sort of on topic for today, I think about like what unites me with other people, especially as an organizer and as an artist. Like, what is the connection that I want to see between myself and others, and between others and others? And oftentimes that's broken down by ethnicity or nationality or gender or all sorts of societal impositions that are placed upon us when we're born. Like, oh, you are Mexican, so you will unite with other Mexicans, or you are male, you will unite with other males. And what does like actual true community, true solidarity look like? And I think a lot about my role in the migrant justice movement when I was spending more time organizing there, and the line, I don't get to disassociate myself from those who are undocumented just because I have the fortune of being documented. I think that was really the crux of this piece, and thinking about how do I allow myself to be detached from the struggles of others because of things like citizenship or nationality or any of the things that I mentioned. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the main things I hope people take away from this.
Yeah, that's great. And you definitely lead into our conversation today really well. And so thank you so much for joining us and opening up this space with such a powerful piece for us to take back and reflect on our own time. Really appreciate having you here today.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome to It's Complicated. Happy to be here today. Thank you to MEX Talks and Latinos Progresando for having us. I'm especially humbled to be here on Mexican Independence Day. So as Luis mentioned at the beginning, this year's MEX Talks theme is history and identity. And as the name of the panel suggests, is complicated. There are a number of nuances and complexities when we think about our identities. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to dig a little deeper into it with our panelists for today. First, Franky Piña, she, her, is a cultural manager, transgender rights activist, passionate writer, and editorial director of El Basement and El Basement Press. Frankie is also the co-director of Pilsen Fest. So welcome, Frankie. Laura Rodriguez Presa, she, her, is a bilingual journalist covering the Latino community in the Chicago area with the Chicago Tribune. Good to have you here today, Laura. And last but certainly not least, Carlos Tortolero, who is the president of the National Museum of Mexican Art. Good to see you here today, Carlos. So let's get started. So our first question for today is about race. So in the Mexican community, we often conflate race and ethnicity. Answering more of who we are ethnically seems simple by saying Hispanic or Latino, and sometimes even just Mexican, while race becomes much more ambiguous. So can you tell me, when you're filling out demographic information, and particularly like when we're thinking about things like the census and applications, how do you identify your race and why? And also, how did you come to understand your racialized identity within the United States? Oh, I think you're muted, Carlos. Carlos is still muted. Give 1 second, because I'm sure you're saying something important. We want to make sure to hear you. There you go.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good. You know, I never check off race. I'm Mexican, first and foremost. I'm also a Latino, but I never check off race. Race for Latinos is a thing that really doesn't make sense. There's so many different races that make us up in a sense. And I don't like, the government to ask me questions. I should be asking the questions and define who I am, not the government. So I don't check off race.
Okay, Frankie or Laura, would you like to share your perspective?
Well, I think we have, up until very recently, we had very few options of what we could actually check out, right? So that limited a lot of us from actually figuring out what we wanted to be, right? Because we only had certain options. So I feel like we're working with that as we go. I do remember, there was no I remember looking at this when I was younger, coming from Mexico, and I was like, well, who am I? What am I? I'm not filling in these boxes. And for a very long time, as we were just part of this white community, which completely erased our identity in a sense. And so I feel like now, if we have the chance to finally say this is what we consider ourselves, there's some power in that.
In my case, race, it has a political connotation, especially when we talk about the census, especially because they want to put us into a category, which means we are not part of a majority. So, but that question, in order to respond that, I think that we have to go deeper and ask ourselves philosophically, who are we? And then we have go back in the past, in our history, to try to find out. One thing is being Mexican in Mexico, and another being Mexican in the US. I think for many immigrants, we discovered that we're Mexicans in the US, not in Mexico, because we assume that. In the US, for my experience, I became more aware of what Mexico was. I took my primary lessons over there, and I remember many of the big dates in the school year. However, I have so little to see with those dates and who wrote my story and my history. In the US, it is almost the same thing. Who's writing our Mexican history in Chicago? Where is it? How many books can we read and have access in the Rudy Lozano beyond the thesis dissertations from many universities around Chicago? And what are those expressions that make me Mexican? Besides the language, besides those political borders that were imposed upon myself and the rest of the Mexicans. So to go and define just the race in a piece of paper is not enough, and it becomes very complex.
Yeah, those are good points that you all bring. And as a follow-up, Carlos, pulling from, you saying you identify as Mexican and you don't check off the race box, and Frankie hearing, the idea of the social construct of race and really the political motivation behind it. I think it's important to acknowledge that while it is a social construct, there are some real life implications to race, regardless of whether it's actually a biological thing, politically, economically, all of the above. And so I'm wondering, also, I was reading this morning that in the 2020 census, Laura, since you brought up how now there's more options, there's been over 500% increase of Latinos in this country identifying as mixed race, and also a 50% decrease of Latinos who are considering themselves white when they're checking off that box. And so my question to you all is, if we are calling ourselves Mexican and we're removing ourselves from race, what kind of implications does that have to folks who are Mexican and Black, or Mexican and Asian, or don't fit into a normalized European version of what we think about when we think about what Mexican looks like?
I think it's very complex, and I think it's great if someone puts down they're mixed. If they are mixed, there's nothing wrong with them. My view is if you're part Mexican, you're still Mexicano, okay? And you're Mexicano something else. Jonathan was speaking. He's part Mexican, part Jewish. That's wonderful. That's great. I just think that it's important that who decides who you are, and that's power. If you ever saw Roots, Kunta Kinte, what's the first two things they do to him, right? They change his name and they tell him, don't speak this language you're speaking, and that's power. When you have Trump supporters who tell us don't speak Spanish, that's a power trip they're trying to do. No one tells you what language to speak. So I think the key thing in all of this is who determines this and for what reasons. And this is a power thing, and we need to determine who we are, not the government, not the whites, and not the power structure. And when I talk about the white power structure, I'm talking about the left, right, and the center of it. It's a problem. We have a white problem of control in this country that crosses all political identities, and that's an issue that we have to address.
Laura or Frankie, any thoughts?
So yes, we cannot be only one noun. We're absolutely complex. I am Mexican, but I'm also a transgender woman, and I am an immigrant. And my experience is very different than the rest. And I think when we talk about identity, we talk about culture. And in culture, what do we share? What do we have in common? And if we identify those characteristics, will make us stronger. And I think somehow that's what the Trump administration did. And here I think Trump, instead of saying that we don't speak Spanish, he would say, don't speak Mexican. And for him, Mexicans were Puerto Ricans, Ecuadorians, Central Americans. And that would tell us that structure of power, who we are and for whom. However, I think under that administration, we became more aware of who we are. And many different groups of Latinos from different social status accepted that they were also immigrants. Before, they used to call themselves economic exiles. But to be immigrant is also political. And to be Mexican in the US under the Trump administration was very political, because we took a stand. And that, especially through our work and through our cultural production, define us. we define ourselves, not the rest.
Laura, any thoughts?
I completely agree with what Frankie said. I think that when it comes to identity, it's super, it's very personal, right? I think that it's fair to say, especially today, out of all days in the year, we're proud to be Mexicanos, but we are also, and as we talked, yesterday, we're a brother, a sister, a journalist, like we carry all this identities with us. But I think that when it comes to sharing our culture, working together, I think that we have to acknowledge what unites us, and more often it's that unique culture.
Yeah, I hear you all. Sometimes I wonder if we keep race out of the conversation, and sometimes we don't think about the privileges we have for, on the spectrum of white presenting Mexicans, and what is that experience versus some of the indigenous looking Mexicans versus Black Mexicans, Chinese. There's a significant population of Chinese Mexicans in Mexico specifically. So I just wonder whether we are doing ourselves a disservice in some cases when we don't acknowledge that race within our ethnicity and our culture is also something that creates systems of oppression and privileges within our own people.
Angela, there's no ifs and ands about it. If you are light skinned like I am in Mexico, Latin America, you get treated a lot better. The United States too. So of course that plays into it. What I'm saying is when the government decides, say you check off these points. I was 10 years old and I grew up about a mile and a half away from the museum. And I remember I got a little form I had to fill out. And the form said, Negro, white, Indian, other. And I wrote in there, Mexican. My teacher freaked out, like, no, you can't write on this, it's the federal article, but I'm not any of these three things. He said, you're another. I'm not another, I'm a Mexican. 10 years old, I realized who I was. So I do think it gets back that we need to determine who we are. No outside agency. We need to determine ourselves. If every Mexican was gone on the planet, I'm the last Mexican, I'm Mexican. I'm proud of it. It's like, nobody has a right to dictate to me who I am.
Thank you for sharing that. Go ahead, Frankie.
Yeah, something to add to what Carlos said. That narrative, when he was growing up, has changed somehow in Chicago, in the academic world. And we're not paying attention to it because the conversation is not about white and Black anymore. However, there is this denial about the Mexican population, the Mexican culture. And we try to put into a broader concept, which is Latino. And we avoid the dialogue about it, the conversation. And that is also political and economical, because we can see all the departments, even the Latino students departments in the universities. Who are the professors? In the school systems, who are the teachers that are teaching culture to Mexican Latino kids? So I think we really have to start that conversation publicly and not deny it. It's not just between two colors. There are many, but also there are numbers, and that numbers means power. And who has the power?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it actually leads into, Laura, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I wanted to add to what Frankie said and what you mentioned. I really think it's very important to acknowledge your, in a sense, your position within your own race, right? There is a huge conversation about colorism within the Mexican community. And I think it's fair to acknowledge, as Carlos said, right? If you are white passing, then you are treated much better. But it is important to acknowledge that, because I feel like in recent years, Indigenous people have been regaining their power, or finally getting it back and saying, hey, I'm proud to be Indigenous, and that really makes a difference. And I really think so that's very important to not only acknowledge, but to be there and support that and uplift those voices as well.
There's been a lot of Mexicanos who are proud of the Indigenous roots, but it became more fashionable the last few years to say it, but there's always a lot of, I'm very proud of my indigenous roots. There are a lot of people, but it just became more fashionable, more in to say that you have indigenous roots. But to me, it's always been there, always.
Yeah, I wonder if it's also just become more safe. We know that there is a lot of violence towards indigenous communities. We also know that there is a lot of violence towards Black communities, and so we are in a position now, maybe because of the internet and our ability to have access to real life situations, that now it becomes more accessible for people to feel safe in identifying with their communities. But I mean, I feel like we could talk about this question forever, but I do want to move on to the next question. And it's actually really related to what you brought up, Frankie, around language. So there have been a lot of conversations about, the adaptation of Spanish to be more inclusive. Some examples include words like Latinx or Latine, to be inclusive of the gender nonconforming community, and words like BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well. And some folks feel like these shifts create erasure of the Mexican population specifically, or that it Americanizes the Spanish language. So can you speak to your point of view on these conversations? And more specifically, how can we both honor our culture and heritage, but also recognize the call for inclusion and the shifts that are happening within our society?
BIPOC is a term that just doesn't make sense for us. Mexicanos are 2 million away from being the largest group of color in the country. We don't have an M at all. We don't have an L. Do I have to go to Wheel of Fortune and buy a consonant, for God's sake? And to say we're being lumped to the people of color, that's wrong. And to say we're indigenous is not true. We have indigenous heritage. I am super proud. That's the roots of Mexico. But for me to say I'm indigenous, then I'm co-opting all the indigenous groups that exist in Mexico. So there have been some people doing BIPOC or doing BIMPOP, adding an L or an M, but that's still not the answer, because then Arabs and nations are now people of color. There's a term that was being used that was called Alana. African-American, Latino, Asian, Arabs, and Native Americans. Everybody liked that term, but now Afro-Americans call themselves Blacks. I would say just go back to the term and call ourselves Blana, for God's sake. But I'm just saying, every group, all the major groups of color are included there. So I think the solution would be, because I always believe if one group does not have equality, then we all don't have equality. So it should be fair, and BIPOC is not a fair term for us. It just isn't. And we were saying earlier that the Latino population is 50% larger than the Afro-American population, than the Black populations. How do we not get a consonant? That doesn't make any sense for us.
So as Carlos said, right, Mexicanos are the largest group of Latinos in the United States. But I think that because we live here, and again, because of the way that we've been forced to identify ourselves in different, spaces, we have ourselves sometimes forgotten to say that we're Mexicanos first and say we're Latinos, right? So that's why we got into this box now. Now, especially with the latest census numbers and in the more conversations that we have, then we need to acknowledge the fact that, yes, we are the largest group and we are actually from Mexico, right? So we now have this space to finally say that. But I do understand, though, the power and the need to say we are part of this Latino group in the United States, right? Because at the end of the day, we do come from a similar space. We do share some similar experiences, and it does give us some sort of, como se dice, like some push into certain laws or into certain things that help our community.
Talking about language, I remember Simone Weil, a French philosopher. She used to say that we will liberate ourselves when we invent our own language. And I think she was talking about language, not in the way we speak, but conceptually. We have to come up with our own concepts, because in that sense, we're only responding. to some conversations that we do not create. And each one of those concepts that have been imposed upon us through history, we just respond. Do we agree or not? And we don't have the chance to propose. I like the idea of Latinx because of being a transgender woman, about gender. However, who decided to put that term? Who is the creator and why? Did it come from my neighborhood or from a university hall? Who decided who I was going to be? And I think in these conversations, we really have to define ourselves and liberate from the others, politically, linguistically, socially. And I think that's what we are doing. As a Mexican, as immigrant population, we have a huge imagination. How come we arrived here? Now to close to 2 million. We've been creating not just the economy, but also culture. And that's what is defining us. Nowadays, more than 30 years ago, we have the museum. We have an international theater festival. We have plenty of writers, of poets. So we're not just one concept. We're so complicated. And at the end, how does my neighbor identify himself or herself? La señora Lopez, she could say, I am Mexican. If I tell her, no, you're Latinx, what am I trying to impose? What I'm trying to tell her? She knows who she is. So, and I think we have to bring that into the dialogue and create our own way of express ourselves, however we want, but we need to be part of that. We have to own that conceptual conversation because we are.
You know, I think it's very, very important that we work together as Latinos. You know, there's a power thing, makes sense. But I see myself being Latino not as a cultural identity, as a culture affiliation. It's, you know, I am Mexican first and foremost. And as a cultural anthropologist, I can tell you, if tomorrow we stop calling ourselves Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Colombian, and called ourselves Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, Ibero-American, there's like 10 terms out there, we would lose individual culture. We shouldn't lose that, obviously. You know, Asians are very good about, you talk to them right away. I'm Korean, I'm Chinese. I know a lot of people who are Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, who use the word, you know, you're Latino or Latinx or Hispanic, but they never say them to Mexican, Puerto Rican, and Cuban anymore. You know, that's where your roots are. And if we lose that, in other words, if we just use pan terms, in 3 generations, we're gone. We have to preserve our cultural identity first and foremost. And that's important to me, dialogues. And when I was a kid, I grew up with a lot of different groups. A lot of Puerto Ricans are my friends, still are my friends. And we were very comfortable saying Mexicano, Puerto Rican. And now they complain the same time to them that if they say they're Puerto Rican, they're being anti-Mexican. If I say I'm Mexican, I'm being anti-Puerto Rican. How the hell did that happen? We should be proud. In fact, the more we are individual and top individuality, the greater we are as Latinos, because it shows that we have 20-some beautiful countries with beautiful cultures. We do not walk and talk the same. You know, the word Hispanic was trying to do that, to make us all walk and talk the same. We should cherish and celebrate that we are different, for God's sake. So I do worry about, you know, all these conversations about what's the right pan word to use. To me, we have to get back to is we always identify ourselves from national origin and what is our culture, and then proceed to do a coalition. We work together. But I think it's going in the wrong direction now, and we will lose our culture if that happens. And that's not good, our individual culture.
Yeah, would you say, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to point out something that both Carlos and Frankie said, which they said education. I completely, support and agree with the term Latinx and why people create it and why they say it. But I do believe that it is because of the people that understand that, right? That are educated and understand that. So that leaves many people out of that conversation. It does, though, give an opportunity for us to say, this is what it means, and this is what we should be doing, and this is how we should be identifying ourselves, or whatever. But at the end of the day, I do think that it comes down to again, like the level of that education that you have in that sense.
Yeah, I appreciate points that you're all making. I'm wondering, Carlos, even to your point around, the idea of losing culture for utilizing words that, in my understanding, are really speak to your point earlier around like this idea of power, political power, social power, and really like the white dominant power that we all live within, and terms like BIPOC and terms like Alana that you mentioned are terms that create unity across,
BIPOC
that are marginalized.
It leaves me out. BIPOC leaves me out. I'm not in BIPOC.
Right, I understand that you feel that way.
Second class. No, I want equality.
Right, I understand that you feel that way about BIPOC. However, I think that these terms are created to create unity amongst, institutionally and systematically marginalized communities in the United States that do not fall under the umbrella of white culture that you mentioned earlier is really what reigns supreme in terms of political social capital. And so I'm wondering if, terms like that are useful for creating coalition, and, to your idea around losing culture, is that a matter of creating, terms that unite separate cultures, or is that potentially also just an issue of assimilation to the United States?
It depends how you look at it, but Frankie was talking about, who makes these decisions. And, I'm a person who has always, in my institution, has fought for equal rights, for LGBTQ community, for women, always. And the word Latino, I always thought had to be replaced. But I always thought it should be replaced with an indigenous word, because that's our roots. That, so we have to look at stuff like that. So I think the point is, if somebody's gonna come up with a new word to use, we have such access to everybody now. Just put it out there and ask people, put it on Facebook, put it on social media. What do you think about this? But it becomes like, this is a word, this is it. We have spoken. Come on, where's our dialogue? Especially if things come from academia, I'm always concerned, because they always say that they're the community and they're the least people involved in the community you usually find. So I do think there have to be dialogue in what terms we use yourself. And just calling yourselves Mexicano is a political thing in this country.
Okay. I just want to take a second before we move on into the conversation to remind folks who are watching the panel discussion that we will have a Q&A. So if you have any questions that are coming up from the discussion that we're having currently, please do enter those questions into the chat and we will try to address them. Frankie, were you going to say anything else, or are we ready to move on to the next question? Okay, so the next question is about community, and I think that we're kind of going into this direction anyway. So, the experiences of Mexican people in Chicago vary based on a lot of different factors. Socioeconomics, we're talking about education, generational status, and even citizenship status in many cases. And so it's safe to say that we're not a monolith. We all don't fall within a certain understanding of who we are. And I think it's also very clear in the conversation that we're having. And so, it's proven itself to be difficult to rally our community around Mexican specific facing issues at both the local and at the national level. So what do you think we need to do to inspire unity and banding against some of this anti-Mexican sentiment that we've been seeing come up, both socially, but also in policy?
I think we need to elect officials who are much better, who are advocates, and take positions. Too many of our politicians play it safe. I don't know why you become a politician to play it safe. I don't get it. You should be a politician because you want to make changes. And yet so many politicians don't. Education.
That's a whole nother conversation, Carlos.
Yes. So Laura's mentioned education several times, and Frankie has too, as a former teacher. I think we need to educate. The fact that, states like Arizona, where now it's against the law to teach about Mexican heritage. Those areas that we need to get in there. I think we need to be more active, more outspoken, and take positions. Too many of our leaders play it safe. There are times I tell myself, if I had to lead a movement, I think 90% of the people call themselves, that they're an important person of the community, I would leave them alone and go on my own. I think I've been in too many meetings where I speak up and nobody else speaks up. So we need to be willing to speak up. If not, don't call yourself leader. All because you go to this program and after 12 weeks, you're a leader, that's not being a leader. Okay, that's BS. Being a leader means someone who puts themselves out there in a situation where you can be hurt by taking your position. Those are leaders, and we need more of those in our community.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm wondering why do people not do that? Why do folks who are part of the Mexican community not take the position that you're speaking on, Carlos?
So I'll follow up with that. If I really think that as Carlos mentioned, there's a lot of power again in acknowledging who you are and where you come from in whatever space you're in, and that brings into on the table what perspectives you bring and what is important to our community or our experiences. And with that, I just really think that we need to acknowledge that there are many different experiences, right? Just like we mentioned earlier, that there's different, colors within our own group of people. There are different experiences and there are different roles. And I think that in order to move forward and work together, and that's something very difficult. And I completely agree with Carlos and Frankie about saying leaders need to do a better job about doing that. But I really think that if we want to do something, us personally, is we need to acknowledge that we are not, like, my Mexican friend is not the same type of Mexican that I am, right? Acknowledging that there's really a lot of power when we respect each other, when we take everybody else's opinion and everybody else's work with grace, and understand that everybody comes into here with a different role. And I think that if we could ever do that, that would be a really a huge way to finally say, okay, let's work together, right?
I think in order to think about unity, I have to think why we are not united. And I think the answer is the system doesn't want us to be united. Why? There are about over 50 million Latinos in the US. We have a spending power of 2.3 billion. If it was a country, it would be the 9th economy in the world. Think about in terms of political power. What those numbers represent? We are not just consumers, what they would like to think or they would like us to be. We are proposers. We're making history. We are creating, again, in all the different arts. And for me, the arts are the major expression of the human spirit. Is there another expression than culture through the arts? Then why don't we start supporting the arts? Because our arts get enough funds from the establishment. Not enough. We don't get funds for special programs. What is our reading level of the Latino population in the US? How many books do we read per year? 0.5. The books per year. What does that tell about us? Who is graduating from universities? So we have to ask all those questions in order to see where we are culturally. We are producing constantly culture. And I think through culture, we can make the difference. We are making it. And it's going back now, what we are creating is going back to Mexico and has an impact of what we are creating here. It is about time.
And for example, we say the Latino vote. There is no Latino vote. We vote, but look at, 75% of Mexicans went for Biden, but 25% went for Trump. Cubans, over half the Cubans went for Trump. Blacks vote like 91% Democrat. Yep. They can get more things done with that agenda. Where's our agenda in terms of that? So that's a problem that we have. I'm big about pointing out all the problems the white power structure has. And, want to talk about to be 5,000 years, it won't be done. But sometimes you have to admit there's areas that we need to prove. But when the largest group, in our community, in the Latino community, is still voting 25% for Trump. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That says a lot of us want to be white or want to associate with the white power structure. That's what that says to me. But why does the Black community 91% vote Democrat? They can get more things done on their agenda. So when I hear the word, Latino vote, it doesn't exist. Latinos vote, but they don't vote together. And that's something that needs to change for us to change this country.
Thank you, Carlos, for saying that. I feel like we're just like going straight into our Q&A now and wrapping up our discussion. And this leads perfectly into the question that we got from one of the audience members, which is, as Mexicanos, is it possible to separate political identity when political issues have driven so many Mexicans to the United States?
I just talked, so let somebody else say something and I'll jump on.
I would like to comment on that. I don't think I want to answer that, but I really think that I'm a big, it's important to acknowledge that, and I think we mentioned this earlier, yes, there are many different Mexicanos, different classes, right? Different socioeconomic classes, but most immigrants came here because of the system threw them out of there, right? Forced them out of Mexico. And so I think that that should be acknowledged and worked with. But that's the biggest group of people, of Mexicanos that are here.
I don't agree with that. During the Revolution in Mexico, that was true. The last 50 years, it's economics. That's been the driving force, not politics in Mexico. Central America, they're just people escaping. Venezuela got people escaping now. But that's not true in Mexico. It's economic. I mean, the average Mexican, if they can earn half what they do in the United States, in Mexico, they would stay in Mexico. It's not the politics, it's the money, having a good job. That's the driving force. But
they blame the government in power for not having a good job, so that it's, like most people say, there's no good jobs here because of the government. So they blame the system.
But it's not the same kind of system system like in Guatemala, where they're just people being killed by the government, harassed.
Those are extremes, right? That's an extreme, but I think
but in a place like Guatemala, it's not an extreme, unfortunately.
No, not in Guatemala. It's not an extreme. However, that example to pair against Mexico is a bit extreme. But I would say even socially, even in this country, right? Economics and politics are not divided. They play hand in hand in one another, and people do socialize in that way to understand them as, one begets the other in many ways. Frankie, do you have any thoughts? We have another question, so I want to make sure that we can get to the questions that are coming up. Okay, question number 2. What's getting in the way of Mexicanos in the U.S. being united? This is a continuation of our conversation, apparently.
Well, I think, go ahead, Frankie. Okay.
Briefly, I think we should be able to have a common agenda. Let me think about, history is very important. 2006, when we have those Mexican, then Latino manifestations all over the US, what did happen at the end when they showed the power that they could move this country? The leaders from different cities, they couldn't negotiate because they are not used to, they don't know how. Corporations took over. National Council of La Raza, for instance, LULAC, those CEOs, they sold out our agenda. On the other hand, we couldn't demand more because we didn't know how. So even for those leaders that took, luckily, the 10-week session or whatever, they also need to be conscious about it. They need to keep preparing and engage into a national dialogue, which we're not doing right now.
If I can just comment on that, is like the reason why it was a big deal that so many Latinos voted for Trump is because they, people they created this idea about Latinos that are, they're all united because of the political reasons that brought them here. So, and then we started thinking that's what finally made everyone realize, or most people outside of the group, because I feel like we already knew, oh crap, right? Like there's many different types of Latinos and Mexicans around us in the United States.
Let me tell you, one of the biggest things that we have to do, and this is power, even more important than voting, is we have to have individual donations to our organizations. If you look at how small it is, it's embarrassing. We have too many doctors, lawyers, businessmen who make money, who don't give a dime to our non-for-profits. Money, whether we like it, this is not a democracy, it's a moneyocracy. Money rules this country. So the more we can generate funds for our own community, by our own community, the more power we would have. So I'm always outing out people with money in our community, saying, you gotta give money back. It doesn't make you a hero, a saint, you get an award for it. It's your responsibility as a Mexicano to support Mexicanos. It's our responsibility as human beings to support other human beings. And yet the Mexican Latino community does not do a good job of that. Afro-Americans don't even do a good job of that. We have to change that because money is power in this country. Whether we like it or not, así es. So we need to get in that game and play it well.
Thank you. Frankie, before we move on to the next question.
And also I think we need a new generation of leadership. Right now, the average age for Anglo-Americans is about 40 years. African-Americans, 32 years old. Latinos, 28 years old. Latinos born in the US, it is 18 years old. There is the future of the United States of America. What are we doing about it?
Yeah, that's a great point. The next question is, how can I keep our culture alive?
Oh, there's so many ways. You know, go participate.
Go to the museum.
Go to the museum.
You know, this young man who just read his poem. You have to make sure you post where he performs next. We just have to go and support people. It's that simple. And, you know, a lot of our events are free, for God's sake. We have in the community. Some of them are really, price is much lower. We need to go out there and support our cultural people. Because the bottom line, if a spaceship ever landed here and say, tell me something good about the human species, the one thing we can talk about is culture. Everything else, we're a disaster. But culture, we can brag about all the different cultures that we created. So we need to support our cultural institutions. Also, not only physically going, but give money, for God's sake.
I just wrote a piece actually about the way people are celebrating Mexican Independence Day and the way many people keep their culture or the way they see their culture alive. And I think that people do things very differently depending on their experiences. Mexican-born Mexicans might do it very different than second-generation Mexicans, and just the way they've learned to keep their culture alive. But I think that the best way to do it is to really say, proud and loud, I'm Mexicano, this is where I'm from, regardless of where you're at. I think that's the best way you can do it, and bring in whatever that means into that space. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't belittle yourself, because there's a lot of power in saying I am, the Mexican sitting here. So that's my suggestion.
And Frankie said something important: history. I mean, I always say this: the more I go to Mexico, the more I realize I learn about Mexico. I'm always learning. We have an incredible cultural heritage, unbelievable. Go learn it. Go to Mexico. I'm not talking about Cancun here, folks. Go to Mexico. Go to all the cities that we have. All the ancient cultures. It's an amazing. So if you do that and you're still not proud of being Mexicano, I don't think you're Mexican, man. You're something else. I mean, how can you not go and not be proud of this?
Frankie?
I think only to restate, I said before, we have to support the arts in our community, in all the different expressions. I like to say that Pilsen is living a renaissance in culture expressions. We have lots, we have theater every single, in the weekend, every single weekend, we have a lot of plays, we have openings, we have art, we have musicians from different generations, so from different styles. All of that counts, because somehow that's the only thing that we have to reinforce our soul, our spirit, and will give us strength to walk to work. So support the arts.
And if I may add, Carlos said, go to Mexico, learn about the history. There was this project recently here, Chicagotlan, that connected the fall of Tenochtitlan to different monuments in different spaces here in Chicago that tell the story of the fall of Tenochtitlan in modern day Mexico City. And there's a connection to that. So, I mean, there's ways to even connect to your culture and learn of your roots even here. So it's a matter of taking that time.
Yeah, go to Texas, go to California, look at Chicago Street. You would see these wonderful, beautiful stories of our culture. And wherever Mexicans have gone, the culture expands, and it should be different. Culture should never be static. It's always evolving. So Mexicano from Chicago, it's never the same as a Mexicano from Mexico City. There are Mexicanos now in Canada. There's Mexicanos now in Alaska. And so the more we go to different places, the culture should adapt and be a bit different. That shows, it's like food is always being adapted. So that shows the strength of the culture. It's not a weakness, it's a strength.
Awesome. And now we have our final question. It's our rapid response question before we end our panel discussion for today. And that question is, what's your favorite Mexican refrán or saying?
What was that again?
What's your favorite Mexican saying?
Más vale pájaro en mano a que se lo lleve la corriente.
God, I'm terrible. Yo creo que, what's mine? What does that mean, Frankie? Meanwhile, while I think about it.
It was a twist tongue, so.
¿Cómo es? Cuando tú ibas, yo ya había llegado, something like that. Algo que.
Yo ya venía.
Ajá, cuando tú llegaste, yo ya venía, o algo así.
Two came to mind real quick. Viva Mexico, today we can say that. And also, como Mexico, no hay dos.
Awesome. I wish we could talk for longer. Obviously, this is a conversation that needs much more than 30 minutes. But I want to thank you all for joining us. The audience for your thoughtful questions and engagement. Also want to thank you all, the panelists, for engaging here. Jonathan
You were
Mendoza.
great. You were great, Angela. You were great.
Oh, thank you. Jonathan Mendoza for a beautiful piece to open up our space. And of course, Latinos Progresando for inviting us and hosting MEX Talks, an incredible series that I hope that you all join for the rest of the week. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That concludes our program. Thank you so much to our title sponsor, Constellation Brands, and to all of our sponsors, but especially to you at home for being here. To learn more about other events in the MEX Talk series, go to www.latinospro.org/MEX Talks. You can also watch past MEX Talks videos on the Latinos Progresando's YouTube channel. To support LP and the amazing work that they do for our community, you can make a donation at latinospro.org/donate. You could even sign up for a monthly pledge. Make sure you're following Latinos Progresando at Latinos Pro on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter to always have the latest. Muchas gracias. Thank you.